Hey, I'm Olivia, aka Biblioghoul, and this is my April wrap-up. I read 17 books this month just because I read a lot of graphic novels and short stories and things of that nature. The first book I read this month is one of the best books I read this year besides Transcendent Kingdom, and that is The Death of Vivek Oji by Okweke Emezi. I give this book 5 stars. If you love beautifully written novels with fleshed out characters, then you should definitely read this book. This book is about the death of Vivek and is set in Nigeria and follows the perspectives of his friends and families around this death. I really appreciated the way this novel spoke about queerness and the acceptance of queerness in Nigeria, and it was really interesting storyline following how Vivek's identity is shaped and condemned in life, but also he does find community and joy. And there's really interesting discussion through the perspective of Vivek's parents, who are confronted with his identity and the fact that they didn't truly know their child, and what are ways they can move forward from his death and his memory in the present, and how does that involve, leaving behind respectability or trying to reframe what they knew of him. The next book is Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. I gave this book 4.5 stars. The book follows Amira, who is in her mid-20s and is feeling pressures that you feel in your mid-20s about everyone else, being at a certain point in your life and the expectations of where you should be. And in the midst of that, she is a babysitter for a white family, and there is an incident where she is racially profiled and harassed at a grocery store while taking care of the white child. And the book is about her involvement with different white people in relationship to this incident and how they manipulate her and try to tailor the response to the incident to fit their own needs as white people, whether that's the white family and their need for fame and clout and trying to be seen as on the right side of history without actually respecting the wishes of Amira, the mother, Alix's proximity to Black women throughout her life as caretakers. And then Amira's relationship with Kelly after he films the event, and Kelly as a character who fetishizes Black women. And it is sad how the little girl, Briar, will probably end up like her mother, and that was the real thing that was keeping Amira in this role the whole time. I recommend it. Next is The Guide to Being Born by Ramona Osable. I gave this book 3 stars. It's a bunch of short stories to do with life and death and birth. The genre is magical realism, and they all have some kind of fantastical element to them. The stories that I enjoyed were a story about the man who develops shelves in his body out of bones because his wife is pregnant, and he wants desperately to be able to feel that closeness and that usefulness that she has while being pregnant. But honestly, I had to look up this book again before I did the review because it didn't really leave a lasting impact on me. And even though the concepts were interesting, I feel like on some level I didn't connect deeply to the story. Next is If I Tell You the Truth by Jasmine Kerr. I rated this book 5 stars. This is a book filled with prose, poetry, and images, so if you like books that have multiple styles, I really enjoyed this one. It's about a woman named Kieran who is assaulted and comes to the United States to study and then ends up wanting to keep the child. So it follows her path making a new community in the United States and the painful breakage from her original family and how her daughter Sahara is raised, and as Sahara gets to be a teenager, how they both begin together to confront this. The book also follows her struggle as a single mother that is undocumented and has to work jobs that pay her very little, and they are always living in fear of her being deported. When the person who raped Kieran decides to run for public office, everything comes to a head, and Sahara convinces Kieran to tell her story to the world, and it follows that process. So yeah, 5 stars. I highly recommend this novel. The next book I do not need to waste too much breath on. It is 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hompf. And like every person's review of this is 5 stars. So I don't know if I missed something. I listened to this as an audiobook while I was doing like a bunch of other things, so I don't know if that's why. But I rated this book 2 stars. I really didn't find it interesting at all. The plot is that an American woman is writing to an English bookstore for certain books, and they develop a friendship through this, but honestly, like, most of the writing was the request of books, and I didn't know like any of these books, but even if I had, even as the relationship grew, it didn't feel that substantive to me. I guess people like it because the woman is sassy, but I didn't. So moving on. Next is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. What could I possibly have to say about James Baldwin? He's excellent. I gave this 4 stars. I guess halfway because I'd already read most of it and I already knew what was coming. I really enjoy the part about the Nation of Islam and him meeting with Elijah Muhammad, their discussion of the path forward for Black people at that time. Also, I love the ending. Baldwin talks about like the only thing that Black people need from white people is power, but also talks about like about love, but not love the way you would think of love, but a deep love that's committed to change and really moving forward despite insecurities and anxieties about discussing race and giving up power. And let me read you a quote. It is the responsibility of free men to trust and celebrate what is constant. Birth, struggle, and death are constant, and so is love, although we may not always think so, and to apprehend the nature of change, to be able and willing to change. I speak of change not on the surface, but in the depths. Change in the sense of renewal. But renewal becomes impossible if one supposes things to be constant that are not. Safety, for example, or money or power. I think that some of his observations in the end chapter of this book is particularly insightful and helpful for us today. Next is Minor Feelings, An Asian American Reckoning by Kathy Parkong. And I gave this book 3 stars, but I wouldn't take my word for it. A lot of my Asian friends who've read the book have given it 5 stars, and there are a lot of like really personal stories and moments in there that were powerful for them. I particularly appreciated the parts about mental health and the section where she is tracing what happened to an Asian artist, like how she was murdered. But there were some sections that were so specific. They went on for a little long, but I would still recommend it. Next is The Magic Fish by Trung Lane Young. And this was actually recommended to me by someone at the library that I work with. She's found out that I'm trying to read graphic novels, so now she's just recommending me like every queer or like horror graphic novel, which is excellent. But I read so many this month because of that. I gave this 5 stars. It was wonderful. It follows a boy, his relationship with his mother, and she tells him these wonderful fairy tale stories every night. And he is starting to realize his sexuality and trying to come out, but he's not sure how she's gonna react. Through everything they've built up through sharing these stories, she's able to show her acceptance through continuing to tell the stories, and there's some beautiful illustrations in this book. I'll put a picture on the screen. Vietnamese versions of the fairy tales was really cool. I always love when a fairy tale becomes like 10 million times more vicious and people die, so yay! So next up is Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters, which was long listed, I don't know if that can be a verb, for the Women's Prize. And there was all this controversy because Torrey Peters is a trans author, and this group of women wrote a letter saying that this book shouldn't be awarded the Women's Prize, shouldn't be part of this list. So that was awful. But this book is really expertly done. I rated it 4.5 stars. It's hard because I feel like the 0.5 only comes from the fact that I wanted it to be something else, but what it was perfect. Anyways, the plot is that Ames has detransitioned and used to be in a relationship with Reese, who is trans, and now Ames is in a relationship with the cis woman Katrina. And when Ames impregnates Katrina, Ames has all these complicated feelings about not wanting to be a father, all the gendered expectations that come with being a father. So Ames reaches out to his ex, Reese, to co-parent this child. I wanted this book to be about the actual trials and tribulations of co-parenting and to see a reflection on that, but it ended up being more about how all of these people needed things from the other two people in their lives. It's also 0.5 because I kind of feel like there's so much depth to the relationship of the 3 people that, like, the relationship of Reese and Ames kind of feels not as fleshed out, even though there is a lot of good discussion of the reasons why they weren't working. It felt like there wasn't really enough on them talking and breaking up, but I guess they didn't talk, so it was really interesting to have the perspective of Katrina as a mixed race woman talking with Reese about their various ways of navigating the world, both of their privileges and their challenges with their identities. And all of these characters are shitty and do shitty things to the other characters, so that's fun. But this book was just so well done that it almost doesn't matter. If you want a really good in-depth discussion of the book, Sunny Book Nook and Perks of Steph did a whole discussion of it, so I'll link that below. Okay, next is Destroyer by Victor LaValle. This was the first time I got to read Victor LaValle, which was exciting. I gave this 4 stars. It was a modern Frankenstein retelling where the boy is killed by the police and the mother is a scientist and she reanimates him. It's kind of about that, but it's more so about how when like technology like this is created, there is like the need to control it and study it, and the government becomes involved and there's clashes. But the thing that stood out the most to me about this book was the character of the mother and her grief and her viewpoints about America and how it treats Black people, specifically Black boys, and her villain story. But honestly, I'm always like on the side of these characters. I'm like, yes, she was right. Killmonger was right. And to have like the boy Frankenstein character being like, Mom, don't be violent. I'm like, yes, be violent. I support you. I kind of don't like that trope of violence or an extreme reaction to grief or state violence or structural violence or police violence, all of the violence, being like, no, you can't stoop to that level. I don't know. The next book is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book follows Clara, who is a robot that is brought in to help a family in a world where these robots are not like servants, but like little companions to the kid in the family, and they watch over them, etc. And the child in this family has a really bad illness, and it's all about what Clara thinks can cure the child's illness. The most interesting part of this book to me was the mother and the lengths she would go to keep her child in the event of her dying from the illness. Which I won't say anything more. Read the book. 4 stars. So the next 2 books I gave 3.5 stars. The first was Lost in the Neverwoods, which was by Aiden Thomas. I loved Cemetery Boys, so I was really looking forward to this one. I still enjoyed the book, but I didn't really feel like there was a super lot of retelling that went into the Peter Pan story. Peter's shadow is terrorizing the neighborhood and capturing children. And Peter and Wendy, of course, have growing feelings towards each other. The most interesting part of this book for me was the way Wendy's family totally transformed and interacted following her 2 brothers going missing in her childhood. So yeah, it was alright. Then I read Bruised by Tanya Badaju. I was really looking forward to this because it is a roller derby book. I really liked the whole community that got created around the roller derby and the characters, especially some of the older people that used to be involved with the roller derby, with like the queer grandmothers that used to skate and announce the shows, and the disco rollerbladers that teach her how to skate. The book is really about Daya, who her parents died in a car crash, and throughout her childhood she was always taught to be super tough and physical and ignoring and pushing down emotions by her father. And so she just continues this and shuts down even more after their death. And it's also about self-harm, trigger warning, and her bruising herself to let go of this pain. It is satisfying to read Daya gaining a new community and start to grow and release these ideas about toughness and self-harm. But it is also slightly frustrating because of how closed down she is. And I know when I was a teenager, I was also like this and also was all about being tough, but I mean not on the level of Daya, but so I understand this, and it felt like for me, like I was really like, oh yes, this is a young adult book. The character was just difficult to read, self-sabotaging so much, but I really enjoyed the world and the characters. Next is Witch Boy by Molly Ostertag, another recommendation from my coworker. This book is middle grade, and it's all about a society where magic is divided by gender, and the main character does not want to perform their traditional kind of magic. And this is a series, so there's more books. I don't really read middle grade, so this was new to me. I wasn't really sure how to rate it, but I did enjoy it. Next up is Actor Age Eve Brown, which I had been waiting for, by Talia Hibbert. I give this book 5 stars. I think it was my favorite out of the Brown Sister series, honestly. Either Eve or Danny's story, but definitely I loved this story. Eve hits Jacob with her car at his bed and breakfast, and when she walks in for a job interview because she realizes her life is in shambles and she isn't holding down any jobs, she ends up being hired because they really need a chef, and the two become closer. This book has autistic representation with both characters, and Talia Hibbert's books are always full of both romance and really steamy scenes, so if you're like me and you like both, this is a great book. Definitely pick it up. The next book is Hummingbird Salamander by Jeff Vandermeer. I gave this 3 stars. I was looking forward to it because this author also wrote Annihilation, which I hadn't read, but I had seen the movie. It's one of my favorite movies I've seen in the past 5 years. So I was really looking forward to a sci-fi novel that asks deeper questions, and this book follows a woman that works at a security company and gets a stuffed hummingbird in the mail, and then starts digging into this huge plot with bioterrorism. Honestly, I didn't care for most of the book until the end and some of the deeper things that get revealed. The character just puts aside her life and keeps investigating. I'm not much of an action person, and there was slight commentary about the environment, but not in a way that compelled me. Last but not least is Monstress by Marjorie Liu. This is a magical graphic novel with different societies. There are like humans and creatures that are like human and animal. I'm not much of a world building person. My brain can't wrap my head around all the specific details, so I'm wondering if in the second graphic novel that will be clearer to me, but I thought the illustrations were really wonderful. Of course, our main character has special powers, and there's something like evil lurking within her, so that whole I'm a good person but I'm dealing with this like darker thing and I'm trying to control it narrative is always awesome, and a lot of beautiful, strong women warrior characters in this, and I'm looking forward to reading the next edition. Phew! So thank you for watching. That was a lot. I'm debating on in the future whether I want to do deeper dives into some of these books, because I feel like in the TBR I only say sentence, and then in the wrap-up I'm only saying a little bit. So if you prefer to see deeper discussions of things, let me know in the comments, and let me know if you've read any of these books and if you enjoyed them, or if you have any recommendations for books similar to what I enjoyed. Like, subscribe, and thanks for watching!